Over the past 5 years or so, the Souls series has become exceedingly popular, especially with more hardcore gamers due to its more challenging gameplay, something that in itself has become a bit of a meme.
Long live the king.
This popularity has led to the creation of a sort of subgenre in action-adventure games, with many games attempting to ape the Dark Souls style, such as Lords of the Fallen, Neo, Let It Die, and The Surge. But while AAA games have just started to court the Souls series, the indie scene has really taken to Souls-likes. From Salt and Sanctuary, Death's Gambit, Etir, Dark Mouse, Necropolis, Nether, and most recently Dead Cells, a Souls roguelike that's been released on Steam for early access. Now, typically I avoid early access games until they're finished, as I've learned not to trust that side of Steam. But a friend highly recommended Dead Cells, thinking I would enjoy it as a fan of the Souls series and Metroidvania style level design. Upon beginning the game, I immediately started to see all the trappings of a Dark Souls inspired game. Challenging, almost punishing combat that focuses on melee attacks, dodge rolls that use iframes, a setting with an almost impossible amount of dungeons, condescending NPCs, and deaths resulting in a loss of resources. Honestly, I was kind of expecting a mediocre gameplay experience since it didn't seem that it was doing much new. And then 2 hours suddenly disappeared in front of me. Without realizing it, somehow I got sucked into this early access game through its surprisingly engaging combat. Every time I would die and be sent back to the start of the game, I would grab my shield, rush past the patronizing NPC, and jump back into the next procedurally generated dungeon for another run against the horde of nondescript enemies. And this made me realize the true strength of the Dark Souls style gameplay, and that's the game flow, especially in the combat. For those of you who haven't taken useless game theory courses in university, feeling a sense of flow is one of the main reasons we play games, and psychologist Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, some Hungarian guy, described it as a person's skill and the difficulty of a task interacting, resulting in different cognitive and emotional states, meaning your sense of focus is increased while awareness of your surroundings is decreased. This feeling is, hey, wake up. To save you the tedious lecture, basically a sense of flow is what people know as the zone. No, not that zone. The zone is that feeling where you enter an almost trance-like state and lose almost all sense of time and surrounding, when you begin to act more on instinct than planned reactions, becoming truly immersed in the game. Like when you get into a perfect run of Ikaruga, or playing a song in Guitar Hero on hard and not missing a beat. Now, you're likely thinking, why are you describing the zone to me? Everyone knows this. And you're probably right, but I don't like to presume since there are a lot of slower people on the internet, plus the way flow is achieved in games is more difficult than in music and sports, or at least more difficult to design. For a game to create a sense of flow, the gameplay has to create a balance between the game's challenge and the player's skill. If the game is too easy, it becomes repetitive and boring, making the game feel tedious. But if a game is too challenging for the player's skill level, it gets frustrating, likely making the player feel anxious and annoyed. And this is why I think that Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and other Souls-likes are pretty much defined by their strong gameplay flow. The previously mentioned Hungarian psychologist outlined 4 characteristics of how a task can create a sense of flow, all of which applies to a good Souls-like in some way or another. Firstly, it must have concrete goals with manageable rules. Or the player has to know the thing they have to do. If the player doesn't know what they're doing, it will likely pull them out of the game, which is why it's important that the objectives are made clear to the player. While where you're going may require some exploration, and even some help from other players, when it comes to the combat, a trait of any good Souls game is your objective is always pretty clear. Kill the thing in front of you before it kills you. Dark Souls and the like are often described as being punishingly hard, and yes, they do throw some bullshit at you, but it's fair. Every enemy and NPC follows a specific set of rules, have specific attack patterns, and specific ways of moving that are easy to recognize if you're willing to stop for a second and observe them. There are some enemies that feel impossible to beat when you encounter them at first, either because they have huge sweeping attacks, or are intimidatingly massive, or look like they're from some Lovecraftian nightmare. But they never break the game's rules. Everything you encounter can be killed. That knight who looks like he could use you as a Q-tip? Yes. That massive dragon from your deepest nightmares? Yep. The godlike being descending from the heavens of hentai? Of course. No enemy has arbitrary rules that you have to abuse to defeat them, or a secret weapon that must be used to win. All the skills you need throughout the game are taught to you at the very beginning, from basic attacks to dodge rolls to blocking, and it's up to you to use them how you will to overcome obstacles. For example, an enemy may have a shield that blocks all your attacks, but there will be times where they open up to attack themselves, and that's when you can go in for the kill, or you can dodge roll around them to get to their back. There is also a variety of weapon types to experiment with to find out what works best with your playstyle. In addition to this, every encounter is all about figuring out how to approach each enemy you fight and observing their patterns. Attacks are designed to be clear and have just enough wind up for you to decide if you want to get out of the way or block. That's why in a lot of ways, combat in Souls games are a lot like a dance. Strategically moving around a boss or other player, waiting for an opening while rolling around telegraphed attacks, and finding the best time to use healing items is all like getting into a rhythm and moving to the right notes. And being hit is like flubbing and tripping over your own feet. So, when you get hit by a monster or boss, it's not because of some cheap rule that dictates you must be hit, or the game being hard for the sake of being hard, but because of a poorly timed dodge or getting greedy with how many hits you can work into a combo before the enemy responds, meaning you can't get careless or you will be punished, which adds incentive to playing well. Dead Cells also has this in spades. You always know if and when attacks are coming due to animations that the monsters have, which justifies the parry-style shields that you can't hide behind forever. All that's required to defeat these foes is to figure out their patterns and wait for an opening. The only goal you have is to win. And this goes into the second characteristic of flow. The game needs to demand actions to achieve goals that fit within the player's capabilities, or the thing must be possible for them to do. Because even if the goals are clear to the player, if they're not possible to accomplish, it's not really worth much. As I said before, the Souls games are known for being tough but fair, but the fact it's tough tends to throw some players off, as the games are much more challenging than majority of modern games. That isn't because it's trying to punish you though, but to challenge you to get better, which frankly does sound more like a disapproving mother than good game design. Now, I may have a bias towards the Souls series since I've played all of them and a good portion of Souls-likes, so this opinion may be slightly skewed, but anyone is capable of beating these games. Yes, even you, Andrew. Admittedly, Dark Souls doesn't allow you to jump right in and start defeating giant ogres like it was nothing, resulting in a lot of early game deaths, which is likely why people have trouble starting these games. The mechanics do take time to learn, but the games are attempting to push you into getting better. Even when you die and have to repeat the area over again, you're learning from your mistakes and improving. One of the most rewarding parts of playing Souls-likes is overcoming the little tests that the games put in front of you, like beating the overpowered enemies that are placed near the start of the game to taunt you. For example, at the start of Bloodborne, you're meant to die to the werewolf in the clinic so that you can go to the hunter's dream, get your weapons and try again, thus setting the tone of the rest of the game, that you have to be prepared to die and try again. But if you can get into the right rhythm and time your dodges, you can beat the monster with no weapons at all. And if there's something more badass than saying you beat a werewolf with your bare fists, I don't want to know what it is. Even though the challenge of Souls-likes may turn some off, it's incredibly gratifying when you get into the zone and defeat tough enemies. Almost any Souls fan will describe a certain point in the games where it just clicked, where you start to recognize attack patterns and realize that as long as you remain calm and focused, you can take on any enemy, and this is when the game's strong flow starts to become apparent. And this is why putting an easy mode into Souls-likes would effectively ruin the experience of them, because once you get the sense of flow the game is attempting to put you in, the challenge of the games is that much more enjoyable because it's pushing your skill level to the maximum and only heightening the combat. It's like playing a song you know really well on Guitar Hero. Playing it on easy isn't as satisfying because it's so slow and simple, not allowing you to get into that flow you get into when playing well on higher difficulties. Wow, this resulted in a lot more musical references than I was expecting. Then there's the third characteristic of flow: have clear and timely feedback on performance and goal accomplishment. Basically, telling the player if they did the thing well. When it comes to something like the Souls games, it's important to give the player feedback on how they're doing, as this is how these games get away with their difficulty. Getting hit from dodging an attack too early, your character becoming exhausted after using too much stamina, the bell sound after a well-timed parry, all of these are forms of feedback that quickly tell you how you're doing and how the game keeps you immersed in their flow. If there was no noticeable feedback, there'd be no understanding of what the player did right or wrong at that moment. Even those crazy bastards that complete these games without leveling, rolling, or blocking require reliable feedback to pull those runs off. Good feedback also allows you to know you're getting better, because without it, there wouldn't be much desire to continue playing through the more challenging sections. This even applies to the many deaths that the average player goes through in these games. Unlike many other titles, you have to do multiple runs of every area in the Souls game, at least during your first playthrough. After a death, you lose all your insert currency name here, and are returned to the most recent insert checkpoint name here. So you must now get back to that location with your lost currency on the line. This is a more subtle type of feedback, but with each death, as you repeat areas, it becomes clear that you're getting better by being able to handle enemies more efficiently and getting farther. And since your souls and other currencies may be on the line, it's more incentive to focus and play well. Though losing a large amount of souls from dying again can be demoralizing and cause a rage quit moment. But even if you lose all your souls in rage, you will likely want to try again, assuming you didn't destroy your TV, because you know you can do better. This is why players will throw themselves at a boss 50 times until they beat it, because they're progressively getting better and seeing all the patterns, and think, this is the time I'm gonna get it. One of the best examples of this is the recurring appearances of the Pursuer in Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. When first encountered, the Pursuer can be a pain in the ass to figure out. When to dodge tracking attacks, which way to dodge, what attacks to block, but it's gratifying to finally beat the metal asshole. However, as you progress through the game, the Pursuer will appear in certain areas again in order to fight you. These are all optional fights, but they are a good way to test how you've developed since your first encounter, since it begins to feel easier to beat the knight each time you face it, to the point that it starts to feel like your basic enemy with more health. That's good long-term feedback. You don't realize how far you've progressed until long after the fact. And this brings us to the last element needed for good game flow: diminishing extraneous distractions that inhibit concentration. Or don't distract from the thing, because it's hard to get into the zone when some other factor is pulling your focus away.
Jackass!
It's this particular characteristic that explains why the fighting game community tends to ban stages that are thought to be too distracting for the players competing, and often use training stages exclusively since they have little in the way of background noise. I mean, could you imagine trying to compete in a stage like Fetus of God and not end up staring at the background? Like, look at it. Anyways, Souls-likes operate in a similar fashion, but more with how they handle their UI and HUD. A game's interface is how the games convey information like health and current weapon loadouts. However, when a game's HUD is too cluttered or messy, it makes it hard to concentrate on what the hell's going on and what you need to focus on, thus disrupting the flow. Souls in particular goes for a much more minimalistic approach, which can be difficult to figure out at first, but once you know it well, it never pulls your focus away from the actual gameplay and only conveys as much as it needs to. This makes it easy to stay focused on whatever you're fighting while always being aware of your health and stamina. The simple HUD doesn't apply to every game though, specifically Nioh. While I love Nioh's different take on Souls-like gameplay, I found its UI and HUD a bit frustrating, as there's a lot more info covering the screen at any one given moment, and at times it felt like information overload, as you have to pay attention to two different layers of equipped items, the minimap, your health and stamina, and what stance was currently being used on top of the fast-paced combat, making some encounters feel hectic and pulling me out of the zone a little bit. Overall though, while all Souls-likes attempt to do different things that make themselves unique from each other, like different stances, going 2D, scavenging for weapons, or removing defense mechanics, They all share these design elements that allow them to induce flow, which makes them incredibly addictive once you start to get into the zone. This is why, despite the fact that I've put so many hours into Souls-likes, I still love going back to replay them or finding new ones. Even when going back to get footage for this video, I ended up playing even more than I needed because I got sucked into the game and just wanted to do one more boss or get to the next checkpoint. I might get stuck on a particular boss or enemy and get stressed, but I'll still constantly try because I feel myself getting better and getting into that zone. So, in conclusion, get good. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.